Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. There's times in life where you're forced into relationships that, for whatever reason, you wish that it had never started. And I'm not just talking about romantic stuff. I'm talking about work stuff, maybe a neighbor down the street. Maybe something started off really great, and then, boy, we can all tell our own tales relative to that, how relationships kind of crumble. I think it's kind of the story of mankind in and of itself. Things begin to fall away. Things begin to fall apart and fragment. But there are certain relationships out there, whether or not you like the person or not, they have to be maintained. And the reason they have to be maintained is to maintain continuity in society. And I think that when you're getting into the investigative sciences, it's certainly critical, because if the people, the courts, the prosecutors, even defense attorneys, if they can't trust you and that bond breaks, it's catastrophic. And it's damn near impossible to repair. Today, we're going to speak of one such relationship. Now, I can't say that the relationship is completely broken, but let me put it in forensic terms. Yeah, there's been a compound comminuted fracture that is going to have to be repaired, because I don't think amputation is an option. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, I come to you today talking about fractured relationships and all these sorts of things, and you and I talked
wait a
about.
minute.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
I know.
Did I show up on the Newlywed Game and the Gong Show at the same time?
The same time,
Where are you going?
Bo.
Actually, you know what? I figured it out. As you were talking, I'm like, where's he going with this? And I went, oh, wait a minute. You're talking about leaks, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the science of Celeste and D4VD? We've been talking about this story. I know Joe and I were talking about it before we talked about it on the air. The finding of a body of a child. Well, at the time, didn't know. Just got a body in a car that's registered to this up-and-coming singer, D4VD. He's called David, but spells it D4VD because that was his gamer tag. That was how it all started, September of last year, September of 2025. And this body was found. And hey, man, the guy is out on tour. He's got his first full-length album, Withered, and the Withered World Tour just began. And to be honest with you, he's a homeschooled Christian who started recording songs for playing Fortnite totally because he got demonetized for using pre-recorded material. And when he got mad and was whining to his mother about not having any money, she said, well, make your own. You know how to sing. And so he did. He grabbed his sister's iPhone, downloaded an app, went into her closet, and started making up songs. One of those songs was called Romantic Homicide. It became an actual, legitimate Billboard, if Casey Kasem were still alive, would be counting them down, top 40 hit. That's who D4VD, David Anthony Burke, is.
Yeah. And,
and an accused murderer.
Right now,
child
certainly.
Molester.
Yeah. Let's go down that road, because when we begin to think about Celeste, and that's her name, right? We're talking about a child. We're talking about a child here. There's no other way to, as I say, church this up or paint it in a different light. We're talking about a child, and these horrific things were done to her. And I think that, based upon that and thinking about the devastation that first off was wrought against this child, and then concurrently, regardless of what you think about her family, upon her family, and everyone else associated in this case, can we go any further down? Well, it would appear, if that's not enough on your plate, it would appear that there is currently an ongoing investigation. Now, I think at this point it is what's referred to as an HR investigation, human resources within the county of Los Angeles, based upon information that has allegedly been released by the coroner medical examiner's office personnel. That's what has been stated in the news. And so for me, this kind of, in one way, it kind of hits close to home because I understand that dynamic. That's why I was talking about this kind of fracturing thing. Just let me step back just a second and kind of, let's all contemplate this just one moment. Let's just say that there's a case that happens right now as we're speaking in Los Angeles, and it is a very gruesome homicide. Okay, so you've got the PD that is out there, the Los Angeles Police Department. Maybe you've got one or two bodies. It's a highly complex case. And oh, by the by, that you are compelled by law to contact the coroner medical examiner, and their representative is going to show up at the scene. That is the investigator, their livery service, or the driver. They'll come out to the scene. They're going to conduct a separate investigation on their own to do observations of the body, assess trauma, take photographs, do all that stuff that we talk about on body bags. But Dave, here's the thing. Can you imagine showing up at that scene with this news having dropped, recently, and maybe the investigators that were working on the Rivas case show up out there? Now, how do you think, and this is a legitimate question, this is not hypothetical, how do you think that those investigators are going to view the ME personnel, who these ME personnel that show up out there might not have anything to do with this alleged leak, all right? But how do you think they're going to be viewed at that moment in time?
Okay, to make it a little understandable for those who might be coming late to the party, Joe, when we were covering this case, and as I mentioned, we started covering it before the body was identified. If you remember, we were getting information, and it was coming from TMZ and Harvey Levin and his team. They were the ones that allegedly called Celeste Rivas' mother and identified specific tattoos, if you remember. And I'm trying to think, Joe, that when we were talking amongst ourselves, we were wondering how they're either getting this information from somebody, either in the police department, in the medical examiner's office. Somebody is giving this information out and it's being used by the media, or somebody's making it up. And the thought of somebody making it up freaked me out because I actually was very concerned about that. Because making it up is as bad as a leak.
Yeah, because I got to tell you, there's a darkness to the making up part. Because as information has now come out about some of the things that he involved himself in, some of the imagery and all that stuff, that's dark enough. Now, if you've got someone else that might be making things up, and to make up the stories that we've heard to this point, as far as descriptors and all these sorts of things. Now, we do have confirmatory information vis-a-vis the autopsy report, and I've read it extensively. But just the thought that someone would perhaps involve themselves in maybe making something up, particularly for personal enrichment, at the risk of blowing this case, there's, that's another dark rabbit hole you wind up going down, with this. And Dave, the thing about it, brother, is that this information was actually very specific to what was kind of confirmatory relative to the information that was coming through.
Joe, as we're looking at this investigation into multiple layers of departments, where does the investigation begin? I have to wonder, because we know information was getting outed. Somebody was passing along information, and it's like either it's being made up in a room with people in the media, or it's being willfully distributed by somebody in the know. How do you figure it out? How do you know in the department who is leaking the information, and how do you go about finding out?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And now we're kind of getting into the gut, which is something we've really never done, is getting into the guts of how how ME's offices are administrated, and just so we can get the structure really quick, we have a chief medical examiner, coroner, who lords over everything in that environment, and then there are deputy medical examiners that are there as well. They may refer to them as deputy coroners, and then you're going to have people that manage the morgue, okay? And they have very specific roles. I mean, everybody that does intake, release, you have, I think with LA County, they actually have drivers or livery people, that go out and pick up bodies. Then you have people that control the morgue techs that work in the morgue, that actually are hands-on with the autopsies, doing everything from x-rays, evidence collection, the whole nine. You'll have a staff of photographers. I'm just kind of laying this out so people understand how it works.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah. And then you might have a toxicology section, which is a separate forensics area, histology, dust tissues. So you'll have this whole group of people, and depending upon how big the office is, you can actually be tied specifically to a forensics lab that'll do things like tool mark examination and fiber evidence and all that. So whenever this came to light, whenever they got evidence of this, that there was some kind of leak going on, this is what would have happened, I think. You would have had, because they would have had a name of like any of the principals or suspected principals that might be involved, that might have contributed to a leak. So their first line supervisors would have gone in probably and said, look, is anybody releasing any of this information? And then once they started to catch the smell of something was rotten, then they're like, hang on, we got to back off. Because what's one of the interesting things that I heard in the news that dropped about this? They said their union rep is very concerned with the protection of Celeste memory, and how the investigation is going and all this sort of thing. So now we've gotten into this realm, and on top of that, they've backed off, and now HR with LA County. And I know this is very dry stuff for people, but I don't think people understand how impactful this is. So now you've got this other party, which is an HR group of people that are going to come in a county the size of LA. HR probably has its own investigators, I would imagine. And they're going to come in and they'll begin to question stuff. Now, all of this is not necessarily a criminal investigation at this time, but it can be referred if anything is turned up. And let me give you an example of stuff that is turned up. If there has been any information relative to this case that has been bought and sold, Lord help you. Lord help you, because the DA is going to take a definite interest in this. Not to mention, this can potentially, how can I say this? This actually borders on the idea that you're interfering with an ongoing homicide investigation.
Right.
All right. So this is dangerous stuff for anybody that's involved themselves in it. And then you take the bigger view and you think, well, all that aside, personal punishments or whatever's going to be meted out over this, you're talking about train wrecking a case that is so incredibly complex, with the movement of remains after death, decomposition. We're talking about trying to assess injuries because of that decomposition. We're trying to tie down timelines and all this stuff. And Dave, from a criminal, from the perspective of those that inhabit the courtroom and work and move in there, it only takes one thing. It only takes one thing to form reasonable doubt.
Yep.
And so if that little bit of fruit, it spoils the vine, right? When you think about that. And so this could be problematic, to say the very least, moving forward. I got a quick little story I want to tell. I had a really good friend of mine that I worked with when I was a very young investigator. He was a police detective, and he was in robbery, I think, at the time, and had never been to a forensic autopsy. And his goal was to eventually become a homicide detective. So if you're going to do that, you have to start going to autopsies on your own time. If you're going to be a police officer, at least that's the way it was back then. And my friend, whose first name is Gray, just like the color, he was a great investigator. Turned out to be one of the finest homicide investigators I've ever known. He shows up for an autopsy one day, and I am assisting in the autopsy, and I am covered in blood. All right, and I've got it on my plastic white apron. We used to wear these living gloves. You remember Playtex gloves? They called them living gloves, and they're bright yellow, so blood would contrast. Well, he was seated on a stool adjacent to us while we were working the case, and I broke out the bone saw. And that high-pitched sound, I looked over and I could see he was diaphoretic. He had like beads of sweat. Gray was turning gray, and he was like kind of wobbling back and forth on the stool. And I hear him say, "Oh my God," like that. And he turns and goes down the hallway right behind me, which is where the shower and the changing area is. And all of a sudden I heard ka-thunk. And I went back there, and it's this old ancient tiled wall and floor in this old hospital. You've seen it before, that kind of green color tile, that they had in all these things. And he is sitting back there, and Gray would dress immaculately, tailored suit, silk shirt, silk tie, tucked in perfectly. And I remember he was my friend. I played golf with him. I wanted to help him, but my instinct to help him, my instinctual reaction to help him was to move toward him. And I've got my hands extended like this, and they're covered with blood. I'm covered with blood. I'm wearing a mask, and I'm saying, "Gray, are you okay?" And he starts to cower against, no, get away from me. Like that. And we had a great laugh after that. And to his credit, he didn't stop coming to autopsies. He kept coming. And interestingly enough, he wound up becoming a fantastic homicide investigator and could sniff things out that other people couldn't. He had a knack for it, but you have to get past that. The reason I told that story is that there is this kind of symbiotic relationship that exists between the Detective Bureau, CID, however you want to frame it, and the medical legal authority. Okay. And it is a relationship of dependency because of information, where you're exchanging information back and forth. It's kind of like an old phone line. If you cut that or damage it in any way, you're not going to have a free flow of information. And information is what we exist. That is the blood that flows through the veins of any kind of investigation, particularly as it involves a homicide, Dave.
Well, the thing that everyone, I think, is deeply concerned about is that as this case is coming together, the investigation, they were able to pull together fairly quickly a timeline of the relationship between Burke and Celeste Rivas.
Yeah.
I believe that they have proved that Burke was involved in an online relationship with Celeste when she was 11.
Yeah.
But the law enforcement is saying they did not engage in sexual relations until she was older. But regardless, you realize that we are dealing with a timeline that will factor into this discussion, okay? Coming up on the 21st, there's going to be another week of testimony, and this is going to be a preliminary hearing, not that dissimilar from the Charlie Kirk, Tyler Robinson hearing that happened last week. And in this hearing, the prosecution is going to be laying out the information they have to get a judge to determine, do we have enough information to move forward with the prosecution or not? The defense will have the chance to pick apart these things. And that's where all of this comes in. I can have the timeline put together showing you where they knew one another online, Joe. I can have evidence, electronic. We've got over 40 terabytes of information. And most of it is digital in terms of, when I say digital, I'm talking about communication online through gaming and other resources like that. But dude, you realize that shows they were in communication and nothing more. It shows that they were talking online, nothing more. Even a video showing the two of them together shows two people who have something in common in terms of gaming or music, and they're together. But it's the nitty-gritty here. It is all of the things right now that we're talking about that have been leaked to the media, stuff that nobody should have known, that only the people in charge of the investigation and those doing, from an autopsy to picking up evidence at the scene.
Yeah.
This is information that we're not supposed to just have at our fingertips.
Let me ask you, do you recall, I'm stating kind of the obvious, do you recall the conversation we had when this information came out? We actually asked, I think we asked one another at that point in time, what's the source of this information? Because it seemed so odd.
It was too much.
This dump of information just came out of the blue, brother. And we were sitting there thinking.
No, you're right. You say out of the blue. It did. It came, there was no warning. It was like all of a sudden there is very specific information that had to have been real.
Yeah.
From inside the room that actually laid eyes on a report or on the body, on the remains. Right. I mean, friends, this information that we were seeing, it really was, it had to either be real or the most made up, sick, twisted stuff of all time.
You know what particularly concerns me here, Dave? Well, there's a myriad of things, but I hope that people don't misconstrue this as thinking, well, this is just written down data.
Oh, goodness. Okay?
Because I cannot begin to describe to you the level of documentation that goes on at an ME's office. And what I'm saying is I'm talking about photography, both at the scene, which we know for a fact that there was an ME investigator at the scene. Now, I'm not saying in any way that person was involved in this at all. Please understand that to begin with. But they captured images out there. Those images were brought back to the coroner medical examiner's office. Why are they brought back? Well, I'll tell you. Well, there's a reason they take them. It's because the forensic pathologist is not at the scene. The ME investigator is the eyes and the ears, okay, and the hands of the forensic pathologists in the field that collect this data because, you know, we talk a lot about contextualization here and how you lose the plot. You know, that's the term that people use many times. But for medical examiner personnel, you have to be able, as an investigator, to transport the forensic pathologist out there in documentation, whether it's photography, measurements, or a report, and then one-on-one conversation. So that data comes into the office, and then anything that is collected back into the morgue. Now, there's a central file that all this data is, and Celeste has and you can, I don't have it off the top of my head, but if you look at her autopsy report, she has a specific case number. When you take that case number, most of the time at ME's office, they refer to that not as a case number, but as an accession number. An accession number is, it goes to the body itself. That means that accession number is tied to her remains. So that file would be collected there and it's bundled. And you might have multiple files within the big file. I'm not a computer guy, but that's the way it works. And so you might have something, scene images, autopsy images, okay? You can click on that and then it populates that area. So one of the things that's really troubling here is, and this is purely hypothetical on my part, but you have to ask this question. I guarantee an HR investigator is going to ask it. You know who else is going to ask it? It's going to be a DA and their staff, and also homicide after they get through cussing a blue streak, which they're probably still cussing a blue streak to this point. Gosh. So you've got all that data. I'm going to be interested to see as we move forward, you know, because they keep talking about leaks. I wonder if there is anything out there that's going to float onto the internet. And listen, we deal in a world, Dave, brother Dave, that is connected from here to the Far East, to South America, to Russia, to everywhere. All it would take is for data to be sent to some bad actor. They can release it from that location. You know, I actually had a case in Atlanta many, many years ago where an Atlanta firefighter took a picture of a body that was impaled on a post. Guess what? That image originated, was sent back to the U.S. and put I think it was on rotten.com when that still existed. That entity was in Germany, and it wound up on the internet back in the internet's infancy. And so don't tell me that things can't be disseminated kind of through the back door and sent all over the place. So the question is, I think, what is floating around out there? And then to a bigger question, boy, I'm on a soapbox now, I'm sorry, but bigger question is, there's been so much made about this in the media. You talk about tainting the pool, because we're not even at the point of a jury selection now. What's happening on the 21st? It's like, you know, that day is going to be another hearing, right?
It is a hearing where everybody, you just present before a judge, and the idea is, do we have enough evidence from the prosecutorial standpoint to move forward? And then the defense answers each one of these things brought up by the prosecution, and the judge alone will decide whether or not this case is, if there's enough evidence. Did D4VD do this or not? Is not decided. Guilt or innocence is not decided. It's merely a matter of, do we have enough evidence to move forward with finding out everything? And the problem with these ideas of a leak, Joe, is what you were mentioning a second ago, and it's really simple, friends. When it comes down to reasonable doubt, okay, I mentioned how we can put them in the same room. We can put Joe and I can. You probably can, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all, we could all right now put Celeste Rivas Hernandez and D4VD Burke in the same room. We can see on video her running to meet him. That last morning she was skedaddling away from home, runs by the liquor store and it picks her up. We can see the area where his car was parked, where he paid kids off to sneak a phone to her. Okay, we've got all of this, but you know what? None of that means D4VD Burke cut her up. It doesn't mean that he ended her and then took her apart. It doesn't mean any of that. It doesn't prove any of that. It does prove that something was going on between the two of them, that they knew one another. But hey, man, you know what? They could have just been friends. He's a big older brother to her. He provides her with some things that there are innocent explanations for things, friends, and you have to take that into consideration. And if, because somebody in that office leaked information to the media and it now is tainted evidence and is tossed, you lose the evidence that actually could link killer and victim.
Yeah, you really do. And as we've mentioned on body bags, lo these many years, the body is the central bit of evidence that you have in any case. And you know what? The courts, lawyers, they even have a specific term for it. It's called the corpus delicti, the body of the evidence. And that is what is at risk here. So, Dave, we're talking about Tuesday, July 23rd, and kind of put people in perspective here. You and I are having this convo on the 13th of July right now. Now, I got to tell you, one of the things I'm looking for over the next few days, and just call me leery. I'm really wondering, because this date has been set, I'm really wondering if we're going to see this thing get pushed, if it's actually going to transpire on the 21st.
You got to remember, Joe, that on July 7th, a status conference was called, and everybody showed up. They stood, everybody being the prosecution and the defense, they stood in front of the judge, and he queried them. Are you ready to move forward with this, the hearing to determine, And they all said, yeah, we're ready. Let's go. I mean, there's so much evidence here that this was a reasonable question to ask at the status conference, Joe. The judge, I'm sure, was expecting to hear we're ready to move forward with the preliminary hearing. But he had to hear it from both sides, and they both said, yes, we're ready to move forward. But, Joe, we were going over this earlier, the expected evidence in the day one. Okay, you got to remember, day one, you're going to lay out your case. You're basically giving a the judge, here's why we did what we did. Here is the evidence we had that caused us to believe this. And here is what we're going to prove to you over the next couple of days. And that's where they'll start with. They'll start with day one, discovery of Celeste Rivas' body, where it was found. Remember when it was found, Joe, we had a body found in an abandoned Tesla in the Hollywood Hills, towed to a yard by police. And 3 days later, the smell hits everybody, and we started covering the case. September 8th, right?
Yeah.
And we covered it because, well, again, a Tesla, first of all, outside of LA, Teslas are they're not that common to see. I don't see them every day, but
well, here in rural Alabama, we don't,
right.
But, they're out there, they're certainly out there.
I do have an electric Barbie wagon that Hannah had when she was 6, so it runs on batteries. Yeah, it's excellent.
Yeah,
but
I had
anyway,
a few of those too.
My whole point is that they're going to start with that. They will start with the discovery of the body, and they are going to walk it through to show what they have. And they're not laying out, this is not guilt or innocence, okay?
No, it's not.
This is none of that. This is merely, and it's just beyond accusation, okay? What made you guys hone in on David Anthony Burke as a suspect? That's what they're going to show.
Yeah, it is. And here's, you mentioned some of the evidence that, and some of the detail that they're going to go through relative to this, but also on that first day, this is who they're expecting to call, Dave. So we'll have the lead homicide detective. Mm-hmm. And, people hear the term lead detective, and they probably think, well, he tells people to go here and go there. That's not all they do. If you are a lead homicide detective, your job is management, okay? So you might have multiple investigators that are within the chain or that are within your purview, okay? And you can even have a junior detective that has no rank, but their name has come up on, it's your turn, okay? So they catch the case.
Okay.
I have seen cases where they are short on people, and there's actually a sergeant detective that might fall under the direction of the lead detective. When you are the lead, you supersede everything else, okay? And so they are if you imagine this, they are the keeper of record. So they have these huge binders that they put together. It is mind-numbing, everything that they have to keep track of. And it's like directing airplanes, and you're the only guy in the tower, and you're responsible for this case. And so he's going to get on the stand, and they're going to ask him very direct questions about how did you come into this information? Who are the people involved in this? How many other investigators do you have under your control? Who are the crime scene technicians that you have under your control? Who's your point of contact with the ME's office? Who's your point of contact with the laboratory? And also, if you're doing digital, well, the digital person is working as a digital investigator, but they fall beneath the control of the lead investigator. And also, if there are any other peripheral investigative agencies, let's say you call in the state police, or let's say you involve the feds in it, well, the lead investigator's point of contact on that. They're responsible for all that follow-up. Do you see how extensive this thing is?
Here's the next step, is that while the lead investigator is the chief organizer of everything and keeping track, as you mentioned, that there's something I learned, and you got to realize, Joe and I have been on the same shows on a panel going back to Nancy Grace on HLN. Back then on the same panels. Joe's been doing death investigations as long as many of us have been alive. But I learned something that I didn't realize and didn't know, and it actually comes into play right now, okay? And that is this. Two of the most important people in the investigation when it comes to going in front of a judge, the finder of the victim and the first uniform, the first badge on the scene. These two first people are so important that after the lead investigator, those first officers, they're going to be on the stand because they're going to have to paint the whole scene. What happened when you got there?
Yeah. And if you ever notice, I did a lot of what they call gavel to gavel coverage.
Right.
Some on Court TV, but primarily on Law and Crime Network, which, I was just on air with my boy, Jesse Weber, in New York last week. What a great time that was. And when you get people leaning in, when these trials open up, you'll have the attorneys, with all their bombast and everything, they'll be doing their opening statements and they're saying, we're going to prove this and that. But it's really when that first responder gets up on scene, you'll see everybody just kind of lean in, like this. It's like, I want to hear what this guy has to say.
Yeah.
What did you say? They'll say something like, Officer Smith, how'd you first find out about this case? Well, we received a call at 0200 or whatever the time was. Mm-hmm. And then they begin to kind of paint this narrative, and they're storytelling at this point in time because it's transporting everybody in that courtroom back to that time. And the main person now is not a jury. It's going to be the judge that's listening to this because the judge, just like with Charlie Kirk, they're trying to make sense of all of this, okay, and try to understand it, And so you're talking to the court at this point in time with a preliminary hearing, and the judge acts as a referee because there will be objections made, and there'll be submissions of evidence, because one of the things they're trying to do, for instance, is they want to try to get this evidence in, and they kind of initially test the validity of the evidence that's going to be submitted to wonder if it's going to be included or excluded, and sometimes there'll be follow-up hearings relative to that. I sat, and I know I've told the story before, forgive me for prattling on, but I actually sat in a hearing for 2 or 3 days one time over photography, and that's in a preliminary hearing, what's going to be included and excluded. So anyway, my point is that they're going to tell the story here of how they came to be there. And then also the other person in this first day you're going to be talking to, or they're going to be talking to, is probably a crime scene investigator. The actual person doing the photography, the documentation, all this sort of thing.
Well, they're going to get it on the very first day, they're going to get it from discovery of the body to how did you hone in on this suspect. Right. The reason is we've only got 5 days, man. We've got 1 week of preliminary hearings scheduled, and in that time, there's a lot of ground that has to be covered. Yes. But 4 days, not 5? Yeah, 4 days.
4 days.
Is that what it is? Okay,
I 4 days. It's 4. Yeah.
Anyway, you look at it, think of the number of shows that have been done on this case with information, okay?
Oh, my gosh.
It ain't all coming in. It's going to be the Cliff's version of what took place and how to prove it. Because, again, it's not guilt or innocence. It's not anything other than, is there sufficient credible evidence moving forward that, yes, we can justify holding this person for trial?
Well, yeah. And as you mentioned, that second day, on the 22nd, Dave, let me run down this list of evidence they're talking about here that's going to be presented. We're talking about cell phone data, GPS, surveillance camera stuff. So this is all the electronic stuff, license plate readers, phone extraction, social media communications. Lord, have we heard about that? And we've seen some of that stuff demonstratively. Internet search history. Okay, let that sink in. And then cloud account records. And of course, you're going to have to bring in the individuals that can speak to that. Because I got to tell you, it's easier for me to listen to DNA testimony. I'm fascinated by it. You start to talk about the electronic data, and it's like Mandarin Chinese to me. I don't understand.
And this is the exact opposite, because I'm like that with the DNA. But when you get into this, I'm with you, man. I'm drawing maps. I'm drawing schematics. I'm all there. And that's that's why this is so important. That the entire point of this show today is these leaks, if there are leaks, okay? Because you can't rule out the possibility, Joe, that somebody in the media made it up and just happened to be really right. I mean, look, I think Sister Rosa charges $25 to read palms and tell you your future. Maybe somebody has that. I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't know either.
If there are leaks, again, remember, it's those leaks, Joseph Scott Morgan, that we can use all the digital stuff in the world and show that they were there side by side, talking to one another from the age of 11 till the age of 14. We can show all of this. Doesn't mean that David Anthony Burke ended Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
No, it doesn't.
It's the nitty gritty that's been leaked.
And what's going to happen is that third day, Katie barred the door because on July 23rd, what is scheduled at that point in time is that you're going to have the medical examiner, you're going to have the DNA analyst, the criminalist, who is the person that does the criminalist does an overall examination of the evidence. You can talk about toxicology, you can talk about trace evidence, tool marks, and all that sort of stuff. And then they will have a specific trace examiner that will be there as well. And Dave, I submit to you that, when they get into this cause and manner thing, that's going to open the door for the defense. Now, I don't know how much latitude the judge is going to give, because we don't know what the status of that HR investigation is. We also don't know what the DA's thinking. Okay? You got two separate dynamic things that are going on at the same time, because the DA is trying to decide, okay, I know I've got this burr under my saddle with whatever it is that has been released. How far do I want to go in this preliminary hearing? What questions am I going to ask the ME? And it would not surprise me, Dave, if they would compel the chief medical examiner to show up in court, maybe the investigator that handled the case. That third day might turn into an all medical examiner show. And if that happens, that's going to be problematic, I think, because we can get an idea that there's something there. Now, they might walk in, just dismiss it and say it's just nothing, but, it's fairy dust. It doesn't, it's not real, or whatever the case might be. But there's been enough made of it to this point where it's going to have to be judged, talked about in this preliminary hearing. And they're also going to want to know, and I don't know if they've had enough time to track this now, but where did this evidence go? How I was talking about how it could have been disseminated and all those sorts of things, because the judge is going to want that. He's going to ask that question. Dollars to donuts, brother. They're going to want to know, what's the end game here? Where did this go? Whose digital cloud did this stuff wind up on? Because that's a salient point, and, all I can think of is that they're going to be focused on that. Whereas in the preliminary hearing, they might not even get to cause and manner of death, which is the corpus delicti, which is, that's what we're here for, Celeste. And all that other stuff, right you were, and describing that. All this other stuff about putting her there and them traveling together, communications and all of this. And yes, it's a car that, he has connection to, but that still doesn't, if you can't hone in on, causal factors of death and all that stuff, boy, you're really handicapped working a case and presenting a case here. Well, friends, I got to tell you, we will find out what's going to happen with the Celeste Rivas case. And we're going to find out in this preliminary hearing. I got to tell you, stay tuned. Brother Dave and I are going to be all over this. We're going to be watching this. We're going to be all over it next week. And we will revisit you, my friends, again, and give you some insight into it that maybe you haven't thought about. Maybe we haven't thought about to this point. Either way, we have to remember the victim. And I hope that everybody else is too, including those that work at the medical examiner's office. And I hope that a lesson has been learned here that they can move forward with, because it's not about what you want. If there's financial gain or whatever, it's about the victim and remembering them and trying to determine what the truth is. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.